At its peak in 2022, Topgolf was generating nearly 40% of a multi-billion-dollar company's total revenue. 89 glowing venues worldwide. Microchipped golf balls flying through the air while customers ate, drank, and partied in 65,000 square foot entertainment complexes. This wasn't just golf anymore. This was the future of entertainment. But just 3 years later, same venue sales collapsed by double digits. The company took a staggering $1.452 billion impairment charge. And by 2025, they were scrambling to spin off the entire operation just to survive. What happened? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how Topgolf went from the hottest entertainment concept in America to a financial black hole that nearly destroyed one of golf's most iconic brands. And if you stick around to the end, I'll show you the empty building that perfectly symbolizes why this empire was doomed from the start. Let me take you back to 2000. Two British entrepreneurs had a simple idea. What if golf wasn't boring? Think about it. Golf in 2000 was your grandfather's game. Stuffy country clubs, dress codes, 4-hour rounds. Young people weren't interested. Participation was declining. The entire industry was aging out. Then Steve and Dave Jolliffe created something nobody had seen before. They put microchips in golf balls. They turned driving ranges into competitive games with real-time scoring. They added bars. They added food. They made it social. But here's what made Topgolf genius. They did the opposite of everyone else. While traditional golf courses were trying to preserve exclusivity, Topgolf embraced accessibility. No experience required. No dress code. Show up with friends. Drink beer. Hit balls at targets. Win points. Have fun. The timing was perfect. Millennials were entering their peak spending years, and they were hungry for social experiences. They didn't want to join country clubs. They wanted Instagram moments. They didn't want quiet afternoons. They wanted music, competition, and shareable content. Topgolf gave them all of it. By 2010, they'd opened locations across the UK and were eyeing the massive American market. By 2014, they had 30 venues and were opening new ones every few months. People were waiting hours for hitting bays. Corporate events were booking out months in advance. Birthday parties, bachelor parties, date nights. This wasn't a golf company anymore. This was an entertainment phenomenon wrapped in a golf theme. And competitors? They couldn't replicate it. Traditional driving ranges didn't have the technology infrastructure. Sports bars didn't have the space or the novelty. Entertainment complexes didn't have the same draw. Topgolf had found something incredibly rare in business, a genuine blue ocean. Now here's where it gets interesting. Most entertainment businesses are limited by labor, inventory, or capacity. Topgolf had none of those problems. Their business model was almost too good to be true. Think about the economics. Each venue could host over 100 hitting bays. Each bay could turn over multiple times per day. Food and beverage markups were restaurant level. Technology costs were mostly upfront. And once you built the brand, customers marketed it for you through social media. The scalability was insane. A single successful venue could generate $25 million to $30 million in annual revenue. The model was repeatable. Find a major metro area. Build a massive facility. Open it up. Watch the lines form. And here's the kicker. The technology created a natural moat. Those microchip balls? The tracking systems? The proprietary scoring software? Competitors would need tens of millions just to get started, and by then, Topgolf would already own the brand recognition. Private equity noticed. Investment firms noticed, and in 2021, Callaway Golf, one of the most established names in the sport, noticed big time. They didn't just partner with Topgolf. They merged with them for $2.6 billion. Let me repeat that, $2.6 billion. Callaway literally renamed itself Topgolf Callaway Brands and bet the entire company on this entertainment concept. The plan was aggressive: open 11 new venues per year, expand internationally, dominate the entertainment golf space before anyone else could catch up. Wall Street loved it. Analysts were projecting massive growth. The venues were packed. Revenue was climbing. Everything looked unstoppable. By the end of 2023, Topgolf had 89 locations worldwide. They'd expanded into the UK, Australia, Mexico. Major cities across America had multiple locations. The brand was everywhere. Each venue was an architectural statement. 65 to 70,000 square feet of climate-controlled entertainment. Up to 102 hitting bays. Multiple bars. Full kitchens. Event spaces that could host hundreds of people. Some locations even had rooftop pools. The cultural validation was undeniable. Sports leagues were partnering with them for promotional events. Celebrities were hosting parties there. Brands were fighting for sponsorship deals. Topgolf wasn't just a business, it was a lifestyle brand. Revenue for the combined company hit $4.239 billion in 2024. Topgolf alone was responsible for generating nearly 40% of that. This single concept, golf entertainment, was carrying almost half of a major corporation's revenue. The venues themselves were marvels of engineering and design. Each one featured app-based reservation systems that made booking seamless. The scoring technology was so precise it could track ball flight, speed, and accuracy in real time. They'd even launched membership programs to encourage loyalty and repeat visits. Investors were projecting 50 new locations over the next 3 to 5 years. International expansion was just getting started. They developed smaller, swing suite formats for urban areas where they couldn't build full venues. The future looked limitless. Corporate America was obsessed with them. Fortune 500 companies were booking entire venues for team-building events. The venues weren't just for golf. They were conference centers, party spaces, networking hubs. Competitors tried to respond, but they were years behind. Nobody had the technology, the brand recognition, or the capital to compete at scale. Topgolf had won, or so it seemed, but there was something quietly dangerous buried in those impressive numbers. This wasn't a capital-efficient business. This was a capital-eating machine. And here's the quiet part nobody was saying out loud in 2022. The model only worked if every venue stayed packed. Remember, these weren't small investments that broke even quickly. Each location needed massive sustained traffic to cover the fixed costs. The buildings were enormous. The technology required constant maintenance and upgrades. Insurance on 70,000 square foot entertainment complexes with hundreds of people drinking and swinging golf clubs? Expensive. Labor costs were crushing them. Energy costs were rising. Post-pandemic supply chains made everything from food to technology equipment more expensive. Even the microchipped golf balls had supply issues. The depreciation alone was staggering, around $210 million annually. Every new venue added to that burden. The accounting showed growth, but the cash requirements were relentless. But new venues kept opening. Because that's what growth companies do. They grow. And as long as the new locations performed well in their first year, the overall revenue numbers looked healthy. Wall Street doesn't care if your 10-year-old venues are struggling. They care about total revenue growth. So the company kept building, kept expanding, kept spending. The seeds of something very dangerous had been planted. It started quietly in late 2023. Analysts began noticing something strange in the quarterly reports. Same-venue sales were declining. For those who don't follow retail or hospitality metrics, same-venue sales measures how existing locations perform year over year. It strips out the growth from new openings and tells you the real health of the business. And Topgolf's same-venue sales were falling. First it was 5%, then 6%. By early 2024, same-venue sales dropped 9%. That's not a blip. That's a trend. People were still visiting Topgolf, but not as often. The repeat visits that made the economics work were disappearing. Customers who came monthly were now coming quarterly. Customers who came quarterly weren't coming back at all. The novelty was wearing off. See, Topgolf had always relied on the experience economy. People would pay premium prices because it was new, exciting, different. But once you've been to Topgolf 3 or 4 times, the magic fades. It's the same bays, the same games, the same expensive drinks. And now there was competition. Not from other golf entertainment concepts, but from everything else competing for entertainment dollars. Virtual golf simulators you could install at home became increasingly sophisticated and affordable. Local sports bars had upgraded their experiences. Bowling alleys were adding premium food and craft cocktails. Young people had endless options. And Topgolf was no longer the automatic choice. Seasonal fluctuations made it worse. Summer months were crushing it, accounting for nearly 40% of annual revenue. But fall and winter? Many locations were operating at a loss during off-peak months. The fixed costs didn't care about the weather. During off-peak hours, massive venues sat mostly empty. Underutilized space became a profitability killer. You still had to heat or cool 70,000 square feet. You still needed staff. You still had debt payments. By mid-2024, same-venue sales had collapsed to a 9% decline. Then Q1 2025 hit, down 12% year over year. Management tried everything. Dynamic pricing to boost weekday traffic. Aggressive promotions. Loyalty programs. Membership discounts. But that created a new problem, margin erosion. Customers were training themselves to only visit during discount periods. Revenue per visit was dropping even as costs kept climbing. Food and beverage margins, already thin at around 25%, were getting squeezed further. The economics were breaking. Analysts were projecting the weakness could continue for 12 to 18 months, maybe longer. Some were questioning whether the fundamental model was sustainable at all. Then came the bombshell. In their 2024 annual report, Topgolf Callaway Brands announced a $1.452 billion non-cash impairment charge related to Topgolf's goodwill and intangible assets. Let me translate that. The company was admitting that Topgolf, the crown jewel they'd paid $2.6 billion for just 3 years earlier, was worth over $1 billion less than they'd thought. The impairment represented over 30% of total assets on the balance sheet. It was an accounting earthquake. The market reacted brutally. The stock plummeted. Investor calls turned hostile. Analysts downgraded their ratings. Some suggested the stock had been overvalued based on EBITDA multiples all along. But the damage was deeper than a single accounting charge. The company reported a GAAP net loss of $1.512 billion for 2024. Revenue had barely declined, just 1.1%, but profitability had vanished. Operating margins at Topgolf fell to negative 2.1%, down from 4.5% the previous year. Remember, they were still opening new venues, still spending hundreds of millions on expansion. But the existing locations were hemorrhaging value. Q1 2025 was even uglier. Topgolf posted an $11.9 million operating loss, down from an operating profit the previous year. Revenue came in at $202 million, down 3% year-over-year. Same-venue sales guidance for the full year? Down 6% to 12%. The company tried to spin positive news. Adjusted EBITDA increased in Q4 2024 by about 45% to $101 million. Cash flow from operations remained positive at $88 million in Q1 2025. Available liquidity increased to $805 million. But those numbers couldn't hide the fundamental problem. The core business was deteriorating. Debt was piling up. Net debt hit $2.74 billion by March 2025, including convertible debt. Rising interest rates meant debt servicing costs were eating into any remaining profitability. The company's credit rating was downgraded as lenders grew nervous. The company that had looked unstoppable 3 years earlier was now fighting for survival. The trigger event wasn't a scandal or a single catastrophic decision. It was something far more insidious: market saturation combined with economic reality. Topgolf had expanded so aggressively that they'd created their own competition. Multiple locations in the same metro areas were cannibalizing each other. Regional saturation meant overlapping customer bases fighting over the same entertainment dollars. Meanwhile, consumer behavior had shifted. Post-pandemic, people were being more selective with premium entertainment spending. Inflation was hitting household budgets. A night at Topgolf, easily $100 plus per person with food and drinks, suddenly felt expensive compared to alternatives. And the business model that looked genius in 2021? It required perfect conditions: low interest rates, cheap capital, growing consumer spending, and sustained novelty. By 2024, every single one of those conditions had reversed. The venues that looked like money-printing machines were now anchors. Each one required massive overhead. Each one needed constant maintenance. Each one was a fixed cost that didn't care if customers showed up. Some venues that opened after 2020 saw particularly weak performance. The decline in repeat visits was more pronounced at newer locations, suggesting market saturation was real. International expansion faced its own challenges. Different liquor laws, local regulations, zoning issues. International venues contributed less than 10% of total revenue, showing how dependent the business was on domestic performance. Topgolf had become operationally inflexible at the exact moment they needed agility. By late 2024, Topgolf Callaway Brands announced they were conducting a strategic review of the Topgolf business. Translation: they were trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. Options were explored: partial sale to private equity, joint ventures with entertainment companies, strategic partnerships with sports betting operators. Anything to unlock value or reduce risk. Then in early 2025, they announced the inevitable: Topgolf would be spun off into a standalone company. The $2.6 billion merger was being unwound just 4 years later. Callaway wanted to separate the stable, profitable golf equipment business from the volatile, cash-burning entertainment business. Investors initially cheered. The stock jumped 5% to 7% on the news. But the message was clear: Topgolf had become too risky, too expensive, and too unpredictable for a traditional golf company to carry. The spin-off discussions revealed just how desperate things had gotten. Management was considering smaller venue formats to reduce capital requirements. They were exploring licensing deals instead of owned locations. They were talking about profitability improvement plans, which is corporate speak for cost-cutting and closures. Management cited consumer behavior shifts as the key reason for the strategic review. They emphasized cost discipline as a priority. They promised the spin-off would unlock shareholder value by creating focus. Some analysts suggested a standalone Topgolf might be more nimble, more aggressive, more able to adapt. The company could pursue new partnerships, technology innovations, maybe even pivot the business model entirely. Others quietly wondered if it was already too late. Remember at the beginning when I told you I'd show you something that symbolizes this entire story? Here it is, an empty hitting bay on a Tuesday afternoon in a venue that opened just 3 years ago. The technology still works. The screens are bright. The targets are lit up. But nobody's there. This is the fundamental problem Topgolf could never solve. They built an empire on novelty, and novelty doesn't last. They spent billions constructing massive monuments to a moment in time when people were desperate for social experiences and willing to pay premium prices for something new. But moments pass. Trends fade. And once the novelty wears off, you're left with expensive buildings that cost millions to maintain and require constant traffic to justify their existence. That empty bay represents every miscalculation. The assumption that growth would continue forever. The belief that customers would keep coming back. The conviction that bigger was always better. So what's the biggest lesson here? Capital intensity is a hidden killer. Topgolf built a business that required massive upfront investment for every unit of growth. In good times, with cheap capital and growing demand, that looked brilliant. But when conditions changed, when interest rates rose, when consumer behavior shifted, when novelty faded, all that capital became a trap. They couldn't pivot. They couldn't downsize quickly. They couldn't adapt. Every venue was a multi-million-dollar bet that took years to pay off. And if the market shifted before then, you were stuck. Compare that to capital-light businesses, software, licensing, franchising, where you can scale without proportional increases in fixed costs. Those businesses can adapt. They can weather storms. They can survive mistakes. Topgolf bet everything on a model that required perfection. And in business, perfection never lasts. So here's what I want to know, was this inevitable? Could Topgolf have built the same brand without the massive capital requirements? Should they have franchised instead of building company-owned locations? Let me know what you think in the comments.